Howdy, everybody. I'm Laura Giles, your host of Modern Animism, and today's topic is From Elder to Ancestor. And we have a guest today, Kelley Harrell. Kelley is an animist, author, deathwalker, and death doula. For the last 25 years, through soul intense arts, she's helped others ethically build thriving spiritual paths. Her work is nature-based and centers soul tending through the elder Futhok runes, animism, ancestral tending, and death work. Her books are From Elder to Ancestor and Runic Book of Days, and she also hosts the podcast What in the Word. She also writes the weekly rune as a celebration of the elder Futhok in season. One of the things that I talk about a lot is how animism is personal and experiential. It's a way of moving in the world more than it is a belief. And the thing that I love about Kelley's book is that it can help you do that. So I can't wait for her to share that with you. But first, let's acknowledge the element of earth for giving us a firm foundation from which to spring. Thank you, earth, for our food, our bodies, our shelter, and this beautiful place that we call home. Acknowledge and thank the air for giving us the means to communicate, create, and inspire. Thank you for carrying our love beyond the veil and allowing us to receive that back from our loved ones here. I acknowledge and thank the element of fire for our passion and energy to do something with our desires so that we may make our lifetimes useful and meaningful. Acknowledge and thank the element of water for purifying what has been made unclean, for taking us to deep places so that we can constantly renew with fresh ideas. Acknowledge and thank our plant, animal, human, and mineral ancestors who make our life possible and support us on our journey. May we always have the abundance and generosity to give as much as we receive. Blessed be. Now, let's talk to Kelley. Welcome, Kelley. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Laura. It's really great to be here.
Yeah. So I'm so happy to chat with you today because I think that the topic of your book, of becoming an elder, is such an important one. I've often said that there's lots of old people, but not a lot of elders. So can you explain to us what's your definition of an elder and why it's important to become one?
I think that's a great way to put it. I don't know that I have a concrete definition of what an elder is, and there is so much in coming to terms for ourselves, what that means for us, and having that relationship with community that can reinforce that in a way, to kind of recognize what we bring and sort of buffer off each other. I think for me, an elder is somebody who is really just standing in their power, bringing what they bring, and knowing that it's not going to be a walk in the park. You're not probably going to see the end of your efforts, and you still show up anyway. You do it every day. And kind of the point of the book is expressing that that's a lifelong process. Like that's a bunch of skills to be able to do that. And it takes a life to learn them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I love in your book that you say this book was not written out of mastery, but out of a longing for something I have not had. So I feel that. I totally agree with that. And I find it of vital importance to have those people to walk behind and to be one of those people. And I haven't, well, can you share what it's like to be in that space with these people and what it's like without it, in case people are just like, I don't know what y'all are talking about?
If I'm understanding you, to not have had a good animistic elder, oh, ouch. I think that's what I longed for my whole life, and I had moments of that with my grandfather, who absolutely taught me that everything is alive, it is in relationship with us, and we are responsible to that. Like, we are actively supposed to stand up to that and do what needs to be done. But the contradictions of still being raised in a church atmosphere that did not support that, and still coming to terms with my own experience of spirituality and the really strange things that would happen in my life, particularly as a child, how to find teachers for that, how to ground those experiences in something that let me give in some capacity. All of that yearning is where this book came from. And if I'm honest, it started out angry. It started out a very different tone than it came out. Not that I toned it down per se, but that the writing of this book was my own process of coming to terms with that anger and making it useful, making it wrath, something that I could channel. And I also learned through the process of this book that I can't tell anybody what the process of being an elder is. Like, the book isn't, here's step one, step two, here's how you do it. It's really being honest with yourself about what that means to you, what you're looking for, what you have to give, and what you have to do to be able to give it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in what you said I want to touch on. But the first one, about, you can't give people their path. I love that about the book too, because it's not cookie cutter. People do have to do their own work, and I think that's sort of unique in a world that we live in, where you can go to a master class on anything, and it is pretty cookie cutter. It doesn't matter if you're the first student or the 385th student; it's the same process. So, what made you decide to do? Because that really goes against the grain. It goes against sales. It goes against scaling and all of these things. So, what made you decide to do that in that way?
That is the way that I teach. That is the way I hold the space for my practice. And you're right, it is not popular. It's I don't feel that my positionality on this land in this culture gives me the whatever to tell somebody how to do their spiritual path. We have so many disparate pieces and parts that come together to make our cosmology what it is, to make it something that we can be active in and cultivate rituals to support and engage. I don't feel like I can just tell somebody, here's how you do this. We all have different ancestral paths. We have different positionality in this culture, in world culture, and we have to honor that. We have to honor the places where we come from, as well as the place where we're standing and who we are when we're standing there, which changes. And I don't feel like I can pin that down for myself in some ways, and I definitely can't do that for other people. And so my approach in working with other people and teaching is to help them know what all of those pieces and parts are, to help them uncover them so that they can craft the rituals that they need to be able to make it all meaningful and useful in their time here. And it doesn't always go over well. People get really frustrated with it. They want step one, step
They
two. And
do.
I get it. I want it too. I want somebody to say, Kelley, here's how you do this. Here's how you become an elder. But that's not the way it works.
Yeah.
And I feel like I try to hold as open a space for people to come into that awareness for themselves, but also, be gentle, but also be firm enough to say, yeah, this is where it has to come from for how we do things now.
Yeah, life's dynamic. It just is. And I think until you have been there and done that, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But on the other side of it, it does. And you're just like, oh, now I see why I had to do it that way. But yeah, I think it probably is really frustrating for people.
It is, and I've done this for almost 30 years, and there's been this bell curve of sort of types of people who are seeking out spiritual engagement, spiritual education, and it's been interesting to watch that curve. But and now a lot of people who find me are perhaps more informed about some of those pieces and parts than they were even 10 years ago, let alone 20 or more years ago. I do appreciate that the conversation has changed. Whether it has changed enough, but that's what we're doing.
Now, I want to go back to what you said about your grandfather teaching you about everything is connected. I I have come across people who have that influence, and yet here we are in the mainstream culture where the message is something totally different. And I'm curious as to what that was like for you to have that disparity.
I don't think I realized how challenging it was until I was older and he was gone.
Uh,
I think he held a lot more of that space for me than I realized. And then when he was gone, I realized I had all these questions. I realized there were all these conversations we didn't have, and maybe couldn't have had, because he was not steeped in church going in the way that pretty much the rest of my family was, which made him really different and approachable in some ways. But I'm not sure that he lived it. He didn't speak it. It was the way he lived, and I'm not sure that I would have gotten questions answered either way. But I do feel like he energetically held the space for me to have the experiences that I was having, and to learn from him. And I didn't realize how much that mattered until nobody was helping me do that.
That resonates with me too. So I grew up animist. My mom's from an indigenous tribal culture that's animist, and I grew up here. So I had that too, and I same. I had no idea what I was living in until other people were bringing it to my attention, and they were asking questions, and then I had to try to find a way to language it to talk about it, and there's just no words.
Agreed.
Yeah, yeah,
And I feel like through the 90s, I'll call it the shiny 90s, but through the shiny 90s, the languaging that we were given was incomplete, if not harmful. And it did not have depth. It didn't have
yeah.
roots in many cases. And I understand to some degree we kind of moved through that to get to where we are now. But I still see that that's the thing that's prospering. Like, that's the Instagram guru sort of thing
Yes.
that is still, everybody's flocking to it. And, I love crystals. I love my sacred things. They're everywhere through my house. Like, I get that. But the conversation has to become bigger than that, and it has to start asking how those things got here, and were they ethically sourced, and if they weren't, how healing are they?
Yeah.
Like, we have to start having those conversations in a wider audience.
Well, and I think some of the things that are meaningful, I don't know if there's ever going to be words for that because it's a felt sense. It's something that you can't really give to someone else. They have to have their own experience of it. So in your book, when you talk about how to cultivate a relationship with like the trees or anything, that I think that's an experience. And so even though I just said that, maybe I'm going to ask you, why did you include that in your book?
Well, we overlook it. I feel like in a lot of people that I engage, people make animism harder than it is.
Yeah.
I'd make it harder than it is, because it's just being where you are enough to notice and keep your awareness of where you are, who's there, and who you are while you're there, and where do you stop, where do they start, where's there no difference. Like, on the surface, I'm like, that's all you have to do. But we have to undo so many things to be able to get to that place. And I dare say it takes a certain peace. I don't know if peace is quite the right word. A certain peace or willingness to be still in yourself, to allow that. And nothing in this culture wants us to do that. Nothing here wants us to have that stillness. So I do bring it down to really simple things, and people laugh when I say things like, you just sit with the tree, or find the places where brushing your teeth is a sacred ritual. Everything about you, what you do, what you engage through your day is sacred if you can take the time to be aware of it. And so these everyday things become relationships. They become really important relationships in your life, and it becomes more automatic. I dare say it becomes automatic, but maybe more automatic to be in the room.
So for me, I feel that most and least distracted when I am on a pilgrimage or doing some sort of sacred travel thing. Um, One, I make space for it, and two, it just feels more available. How do you do that? When do you feel the most connected?
I would love to talk with you about that. I just came home from a huge trip that I had planned to be this big ancestral reconciliation thing, and I think that did happen in the background, but it did not go the way I had planned for it to. And that's one of the things that I learned is that when I'm traveling, especially anywhere, but in those places where I'm intending connection and I'm holding that awareness, it's there, but it takes me. I need a few days. Like I need to be able to be there 2 or 3 days and have the felt sense of that space and who I am in that space. And we were running. This was a sampler platter trip, and there were a few moments that really allowed for that, but a lot of it was me going, I just got here. I'm just now feeling this and it's time to go. I think in terms of like every day, I feel it when I'm in the bath. I do feel it when I'm outside, but my physical experience limits what I can do outside and how much time I can spend outside. That's my preferred place, and that's the answer I want to give. But the real everyday one is in the bath.
And I think people have to find that for themselves. It's not going to be the same for everybody. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's it mean to be an ancestor for you? And why does that matter?
Well, we're all destined to be an ancestor one way or the other.
Hopefully.
What kind of ancestor are we going to be? And I think that's where the eldering well part fits in. I think I experience my ancestors as beings who have reconciled their stuff. They genuinely have gone through not just their own lifetime, but the amassed joy and harm and wonder and magic of the ancestors before them, and they're holding that. They're holding it for me, they're holding it for my descendants. But there are also ancestors who haven't done that. They have an influence also, and I have a handy little jar that they go in right here. But they have to be taken care of. You can't just let the ones that have not done their trauma work, so to speak. You can't just let them be loose ends, at least in my experience. So I really like to live in such a way that I reconcile as much as I can, so that at my point of death, I die well. My descendants don't have to worry about whether I'm doing, what I needed in my death walk, and we can all be at peace so that I can be a good ancestor.
Now you are a death doula too. So does your death doula work have anything to do with helping people make that transition?
See, here's the thing. I went into pursuing death doula study because I really wanted to be able to add that very practical part to the spiritual part. And the spiritual part is what I had been doing. Really, it's the thing that has been with me since single digits. Like that's the thing that I understood. Oh, that's what we do here. So I really wanted to give some grounding to that in the more practical bed sitting part of it. And down for that. But I had a major health crisis at the same time that I was doing that education, and I realized I don't have that spontaneity. I can't have those phone calls in the last minute and be there, it was heartbreaking for me to realize that. But it also reinforced that I can teach people to die well. I do the part of sitting with people who've learned that they only have so much time and they want to do that reconciliation work in the time that they have left. That is a big focus of the work that I do. But it's also working with people who are like, I don't know what my future holds, but I know I need to do this. And what does dying well look like? And we just kind of go through what that process is. And some of it is what we already talked about. It's learning what their cosmology is and how they access it, who is in there, what relationships are there for them that will be there for them when they have their final moments in form.
Do you feel like that helps transition more easily or go without fear?
It seems to be both of those things, and I say that like, oh, because it's the most amazing part of what I do. Like I get to witness that for people, and that is just absolutely amazing. And it's also really challenging. It's a challenging space to hold, and you have to be really capable of feeling the things that you need to feel in that process, but it not becoming about your feelings. So I do feel like it's important. We don't have in American settler culture sort of any agreement around what comes next looks like. And it's okay that we don't agree about it, but we have to come to some personal consensus about that. And helping people find that is really amazing to me.
Well, I don't think we have enough conversations about death. We look at birth and we know, from the movies, it's like, oh, and it's going to be horrible. And we think we're going to die like it's just like, I'm just talking to you and then oh. And that's not what death is like at all. And I think if people had more of an awareness of how hard it is to die and, separate from your body and in your people and I mean, it takes people often a long time to die.
Right.
We would have a different attitude about it, I think.
We really don't talk about it at all. And we don't talk about, sometimes people get no warning, and that kind of death really speeds up all the other parts. It puts you in the place of having grief on top of who's going to be the elder of the family. Like, how do we make sure that the body really has reconciled all of its energy lines? How do we make sure that those have been reallocated where they need to go, and that the soul is moving where it needs to go? What role do we have in that? What role is hands off? We don't talk about any of that.
I'm wondering, I know from people in my life that when somebody dies and you're the last person, you're the oldest person, there's nobody between you and death in the family, that's a really hard space to hold. You may not think about it until it's you, but it's a gigantic responsibility. And I'm wondering if you do any work around that.
I do, and you're right, it is a gigantic responsibility. And I think this is the one thing that even in circles of death conversation we don't talk about, and that's commending the commendation of who is the next elder. We don't. There's this disjoint in the conversation around what is soul stuff, what is energetic stuff, what is mindfulness stuff, and maybe that serves some purpose in some contexts. But when you're doing death work, you have to have an understanding of where each of those things is a factor in helping someone die. And in terms of like who becomes the elder, maybe it's the next oldest person, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's the next fittest person. And that is sort of energetically determined. Ideally, we would have had those conversations at the dinner table. We would have said, look, I know that when I go, this is the stuff that I've carried. These are the burdens that I've carried. These are the gifts that I have brought. And ideally, this is what our ancestral lines bring as strengths also, and I give them to you. I give them to you now. When at my time, you are who they will go to. Ideally, that's part of our conversation, but it isn't.
Yeah.
And that those energy lines have to go somewhere. And I often compare them to electrical lines that have gotten broken, and you see what they look like in the street when they're just kind of like flailing around. They can be really, really emotionally difficult when they haven't been commended back to someone who chooses to hold that role in the family line. And a lot of times when I experience people whose grief is enormous, and I don't even know what I mean when I say that, because there's no way to measure grief, but when it isn't moving in some way, that's the part of the work that didn't get done.
Mm-hmm.
That energy line grounding, back to earth, back to what comes next, back to the family people themselves. That's the part that didn't get done, that just leaves it raw and wide open.
It sounds like your experience of animism is quite like mine, and that it's a path of personal responsibility and living with aliveness and relationship. And I know you can't talk about, what somebody else's experience is, but how do you think that living in that path here in America, where we live, where that's not the mainstream, has impacted your life?
It makes me show up more. It makes me stay on the cutting edge of what my capability of showing up is, which changes at any given time. It makes me really grateful for what my ancestors did, and to some degree acknowledging that things that they did that wasn't great is also what got me here. It's also what helped me survive. So, I mean, that aliveness is all around us. It is in everything.
Yeah.
And I often experience it more directly with nature than I do humans, with other than humans, in some ways more than I can experience it around other humans. I remind myself and the people that I work with, students, all the time, that our culture doesn't just not have that, it actively works against you having it. It's a two-way thing. And you feel that. You feel it in your body. You feel it in the exertion that it takes to hold your awareness open. Again, would love to have some elders to help hold that space, because I think that would make all the difference.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell us about your classes and your books? So you have more than one book, but yeah, tell us about all your books.
Thank you. The classes that I'm leaning into the most right now focus around the Elder Futhark runes. There's a monthly class that I'm teaching through Runes for Change, which is a membership community that I've had for 10 years. That blew my mind. I realized that this year. I'm like, how? Time flies. So that is an awesome experience. Just everybody bringing to the table what their knowledge of the runes is and being able to share that, which is not always easy to do if you're familiar with runes. People get really superior in rune lore. So I really enjoy that space for that reason. The other thing that I'm really leaning into is I'm in the midst of teaching the first part of a long-term intensive training for people who want to learn soul technique, soul methods. And I don't even know how to phrase that either, because it's so different for everybody. But it's the space where, like, the first 6 months is the conversation that you and I've been having of how do you learn who's there? How do you keep in your awareness so that there's reciprocity in that relationship? And how do you cultivate rituals that help you access those relationships and know what they need? And then we kind of dovetail into death work and ancestor work and soul retrieval and shadow tending, all of the challenging things that I think we all have to confront sooner or later in our time informed, but we don't all necessarily want to learn all of those techniques. So there's kind of like, there's like the how to be an animist, and then there's kind of the how to apply the techniques of soul work that sort of facilitate how to be an animist. Not everybody wants that deeper end of it, and that's okay. Most of my writing has been around sort of autobiographical pulling together. Here's one example of what it looks like to walk this path in this culture. And some of them, I would never write them the way they are. I wouldn't write them that way now. And you should always be able to say that. Like, if you look back and you're like, I do it exactly the same, I think there's cause for alarm. So some of the books, I'm like, I'm glad you're there, but people read them and they expect me to still be there. Like, they're, 12, one of them is going to be 20 years old this year. My first book will be 20 years old this year. And it is the book about, I guess, what people would consider your initiatory crisis, the thing that leads you to a path of soul work. I haven't read it again. But I still feel like it's important for it to be out there. My book before the one that comes out next week was also about the runes, and the book that's coming up on Tuesday, From Elder to Ancestor, is, I think, the thing that I wanted to write all along. I didn't know how. I couldn't be who I needed to be to write that.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was delighted, honestly, to read it. And I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you sharing with everybody what you do, and wish you the best of luck with the book and everything else you have coming on. So thank you
Thank you
for being
so
here.
much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Sure.